everyone, and I am your host, Demara Virgil, and this is Kweenduhm Conversations podcast. We have an amazing lady on today, Luvyna Mantle, and this is a different conversation because she talks about being married to a man who was in the military. She talks about the mindset she had to have and how she had to figure things out once they were separated. And then she talks about stepping out on faith, even when people around her really felt like it didn't make any sense, but she believed the words that God had spoke to her. She talks about the trials, and then she talks about being resilient, and then she talks about being successful. So I'm going to turn it over to Luvyna Mantle. Thank you so much.
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much for the amazing introduction. I'm super excited to be here today with you.
Thank you. So let's start with the beginning because we always have a pre-conversation before we record. And I felt like her story, it was different because she talks about being married, but then even though you're married, you still have to figure things out because you're alone during a certain season. And so this is why this is important, because you have some ladies who they are married, but different situations happen. And so they have to literally function as though they are single. And some women may be going through this, but they don't know how to conversate about it. They don't know how to talk about the trials they face, the mindset, and just the shift in the way that you do things just on a daily basis. So let's just start with the beginning.
Yeah, my husband and I got married pretty young, which is typical of the Army. And he was a scout in the Army. So for anybody out there that knows anything about the Army, they train a lot, they're deployed a lot, they do a lot of rotations and things like that. In our first year, he deployed, literally first year of marriage, he went on rotation to South Korea. Everything was blowing up there. So he was gone for 10 months during that period, came home, and less than a year later, we got stationed in Germany. So we were in Germany. He was on training and deployment. My husband was basically never home. It was weird when he was home. The most he was actually home was during COVID quarantine. Germany went into lockdown. I think he was basically home for 4 months at a time. And that was the most he'd ever been home at one point in our entire marriage. So it was, but during that time, we had our oldest over while we were in Germany. The only reason my husband was actually home for the birth is because my child was 3 weeks late and the German doctors wouldn't induce me. So I went through almost my entire pregnancy with my husband being gone from trainings and missions and stuff like that to he got home right before the baby was born. Was home for, I think they got a couple weeks of leave, and then it was back to normal life type stuff. And then during that period, he got injured. So the Army decided to medically retire him. And in August of 2020, so my oldest was a week and a half from turning 1, we knew that he would be home, or at least we thought he was going to be home out of the Army for good in 4 months. So we made a decision as a family for me and my almost 1-year-old and our 2 dogs to move back to Kansas, where my family was at, so that we could buy a house, get jobs, get daycare, for kind of get some things figured out before this huge transition shift. So I flew from Germany all the way to Chicago by myself. And then my dad and brother picked me and my son and our 2 dogs up in Chicago because it's the only place that we could get the dogs in. And we drove 8-10 hours from Kansas. Wow. From there. I bought a house. We lived with my parents for a month or 2 while we were trying to find a house and get a job and buy a car, do all the adult things. Got situated, and then right when we thought he was going to be home by Christmas, COVID hit Germany and locked everything down again. And it ended up being a year and a half before he was able to finally transition out of the Army and get home for good. And during that period, I got a job with the Air Force. I worked my way up through the Air Force and was at director level over a couple organizations. Loved my job, loved the people I was working with. The Air Force is a little bit different from the Army, but it was a very similar environment that I'd gotten used to. My husband did 7 years in the Army. So at this point, we'd made a lot of friends. The military was our life. And then almost a year, so we left in August, and in July, the beginning of July, he was finally able to come home for 3 weeks. So he was gone for almost basically the first or the second year of my child's life. He was gone. And we had made a decision that we wanted a second child. We were tired of waiting for the Army to get their life together so that we could get our life together. And we decided we were going to try to get pregnant during that 3 weeks. And luckily we were blessed and we were able to get pregnant. We were so excited. My first pregnancy had been super easy. Like, he wasn't there anyway, so I was like, I got this. Like, my parents are 30 minutes away. I have help. Um, and it was a horrible pregnancy. I was very sick. I lost 30 pounds. I never stopped throwing up. I was getting weekly IV treatments. I was in the ER a couple times from dehydration. Like, a miserable pregnancy while working like 40 to 60 hours a week with the Air Force, raising a toddler by myself on weekends. Like, we basically lived with my parents because it was a lot. And also during that period, I started my online business. So I was doing my online business on the side because we knew he was getting out. We were about to have a second kid. Like, kids are expensive. We had all these extra finances and we weren't sure how long it was going to take him to get a job. And thank God I did. Like, I have no idea why I started. My friend just mentioned it and I was like, oh, looks like I could do this. I'll talk about this like in a little bit, but me and my dad had the conversation about a year ago, and every single thing that has happened in our life over the last 3 years, the only explanation for it is God. And if it was not for him stepping in, we would be at a very different place right now than we are. And that, without a doubt, that was one of those things, is him just stepping in and making me start a business for some reason. So my husband finally came home in mid-February of 2022, and my youngest was born at 37 weeks. Unexpectedly, there was complications 3 weeks later. So on St. Patrick's Day. So he was literally home for 3 weeks before my son was born. We still thought we had time, so we didn't have all of our stuff bought. We were renovating our house, like trying to get stuff finished before this second kid entered the picture. And he was still technically in the Army. He was on terminal leave, so he's still technically in the Army until the end of May at that point. And really, the first couple of weeks of having two kids was fine. I don't think it was until he officially transitioned out of the Army that like everything just spiraled. The VA, like anybody that's still with the VA knows that it's just a mess, and there's so much support that is lacking for soldiers and their families. There's no support for families after the transition out, but it was horrible. I am not the type of person. I grew up on a farm. My family are ranchers. We co-own a ranch. I'm a farm girl. It is not, at least at that point, it wasn't a thing for our family to go to therapy. And that wasn't even, we all thought it was a joke at that point. But for the next 9 months, basically, until my husband finally was able to get a job, which sucked, but it was a job at that point, I was in therapy multiple times because I couldn't control anything else that was happening around me. But I knew I had to support my family. I had to be there for my kids. And therapy was like the only thing that made me feel like I was not going insane. Yeah, my husband had a lot of PTSD, still does. He had anxiety, depression. The medical reasons that he got out like completely changed his life. And he's still battling some of those stuff. But overall, he finally got help, which is the important thing. But yeah, I love my husband more than anything, and I would trust him with my life, and I always have, and I always will. But during those 6 to 9 months, my husband was not himself. I didn't trust him to leave my kids with him, like without me being there. There was times that I would like, some of the medication that he was on at that point was really messing with him, and he would go into this almost, honestly, like I was scared he was in a coma. Like, he would take this medicine and go to sleep, and I would not be able to wake him up. So there was times I would go to church with the kids by myself, and I would be scared like he was not going to be alive when I came home.
Oh, wow.
Like, I was scared to leave the house without him. It was a scary and stressful time. But yeah, also during that period, with the Air Force, I had 3 months of maternity leave, and it was all paid. And I don't know, something in me told me that I could not go back to work. Like, I had to make my business pay all of our bills, because if I went back to work, our family would not survive. And my family and my kids are my entire world. And at that point, there was a lot. My husband was going through this horrible time from transitioning out of the Army. He was also basically been a bachelor for the last year and a half of his life. I'd basically been a single mom for the last year and a half of my life. Like, at that point, when my husband came home full time, my oldest son was almost 3 years old, and my husband had only been home for 4 months of his life. So he knew his dad, but he knew his dad from FaceTime basically. So he went home from only having mommy to all of a sudden, like, dad's here. Oh, and we're throwing a new baby in the mix. And then, like, dad's going through all this stuff, and mom's like completely and totally maxed out, but just trying to make everything fixed. It was a crazy time, but I knew in my heart that if I went back to work, then we wouldn't survive as a family. And even though I wasn't okay with what's happening, and he wasn't the man that I knew that he was, I still knew that he was an amazing dad and he's an amazing husband. And that if he would get help, everything would be fine. And I don't know. It's one of those God things. I knew that if I went back to work and I wasn't there every single day to help him and be there for him, then we would not survive as a family. And that's one of the things like the Army instilled with us is like family is everything.
You have so many testimonies that there are some women who are going to watch this and they are dealing with this same exact thing now. And they may feel like they don't have anybody to talk to. They may not be going through therapy. They may be embarrassed to talk about situations that are going on with their husbands, because whenever you say, my husband is off fighting, he's in the war, he's doing this, he's doing that, people praise that. But then when he comes back, and then when you have all these issues going on within the house, a lot of women don't want to talk about that because they don't want people to view him differently. And this is important. Just because he's having some issues does not mean that he is not still a hero, ladies. There are some resources out there to where he can get help. And then I want to talk about that too. There's so many things I want to talk about that I've written down. You said, because I personally have never been involved with anybody in the military. And so I don't know the way benefits work, but I've heard people complain about it. So when you say that they didn't have a lot of resources they needed, were there other places you could go? Because some women don't know, if they're not getting the help they need from the military, are there other places, are there other resources they can get help from that'll help with the situations that the VA isn't doing?
So we didn't know this at the time. After fact, I've connected with multiple military spouses that have gone through the same thing. And one, Wounded Warrior Project is a huge resource. So if you don't feel like you can get help through the VA, definitely reach out to them because they have resources, they have people there. Yeah, and it's like it's this whole stigma almost. Like my husband, honestly, and he's told me this multiple times now that he's been in therapy and gotten help, but the only reason my husband ever got help was not because of me, but it was because of our kids.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know, don't give up on them, but also don't put yourself in a place to get hurt. But there's not a lot of resources, but there's other people that have gone through this experience too, and don't be afraid. Like I was afraid to talk about it. My best friend she knew most of what was going on. She probably knew the most of anybody. Her husband was in the Air Force, so I was able to connect with some people that way. And my parents they knew some of this stuff. They were around us the most, so they saw some of this stuff, and they know my husband, and they knew when things weren't right. But even then, it's been years now, and I did not tell my family, and I'm very close with my family, what was going on at the time because I was embarrassed. And it's the same thing. Like you already said this, I didn't want them to view my husband differently because I knew this is not who he is.
So do you think, looking back now, do you think you would do things differently? Because there are some women out there who are not talking about it, and the husband, some men don't want to get counseling. They don't even see anything wrong with them. This is me, I'm not getting counseling. No. And now that you look back, do you think that was the best way to do it, was not have those conversations with your family? Would you change that, or would you have just kept it the way it is?
I wish I would have had the conversations beforehand, just because if I would have talked to my family, they wouldn't have changed their opinion of my husband because they know who he is, and they would have been there to support me and the kids. Like regardless of what our decision was and how it ended, they would at least been there, and I wouldn't have felt totally alone. But on the other side of things too, we stopped talking. Both of us stopped talking to our Army friends, and those had been basically our family for the last 7 years because we were hours or like across the world from our family. And I wish I would have reached out to them and talked to them about what was happening. And I wish I would have reached out to his friends and talked to them, because that was part of the thing too, is he felt so isolated.
Mm.
And it also, like, he transitioned out right when the war with Ukraine started, and literally all of our friends deployed. Every single one of our friends deployed. His entire unit was there. One of his soldiers was killed in an accident. Like, all this happened at the same time.
Oh, wow.
And I wish I would have reached out to both of ours, to my friends, just to have that support, because they would have been there for me and my family, but also his, because I know his friends would have reached out and they would have helped him through this period. And he, at least if they were reaching out and showed they cared, he wouldn't have felt so isolated.
Exactly. For women who are going through this right now, what are some of the things you did besides therapy? Therapy is very important. There's nothing wrong with you because you have therapy, because you seek therapy. Like, it's very important. We can hold everything inside of us, and we have all these trapped emotions, and that can make you physically sick, ladies. So there's nothing wrong with talking to somebody, being able to let these emotions out, being able to express yourself with someone you can trust. Some of you may not have the insurance options, but find someone you can trust. Is there someone in your church? Can you talk to your pastor? Can you talk to your first lady? Are there some type of nonprofit counseling places around you to where you can schedule some type of appointment? But to let all these emotions just sit there, that is very unhealthy for you. But can you talk about some of the things you did outside of therapy? And then I know you say you went to church. So what are some things you did? Let's say you would wake up in the morning and you had all this stuff going on because your son had to get used to his father being there. You had to get used to him being there. And then because you have a certain routine when you're single, right? This is the routine. This is what we do. This is my space. I'm used to being in here, but you have to compromise time and space. So it's different. So, what are some things you did just throughout the day, just on a daily basis, just to help you keep your sanity? Because there was a lot going on. There were so many things coming at you from like all angles. So, what are some things you did?
Honestly, the biggest thing was I had to know when to step out of the situation. Um, Especially, like, I didn't want to leave my husband alone because, to be honest, I didn't trust him alone by himself with what he was going through. But when you're at the point where it's unhealthy for you to be there, it's unhealthy for your kids to be there. And to be honest, I think if the kids hadn't been in the picture, this would be a totally different story. But our kids is what kept us fighting for something better. And there was times where I had to just either leave him at home and go run errands or go to my parents, just get a break. And it's not what I wanted to do, but I just had to know. You have to know when to step out of the situation and just put pause and give you, both of you, time to breathe and talk about next steps or think about next steps or whatever.
Oh, wow. So, when it came to your job, did you feel like if you were gone, because you said between 40 to 60 hours you were gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So part of the issue was the time you would be away from home because you couldn't monitor things that were going on. Like, anything can happen in a 10-hour workday. So it's, how am I going to be able to function on this job when I know that my husband is at home all by himself for 8 to 10 hours a day, 5, 6 days a week,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Let's talk about when you decided that I'm gonna walk away from this job, I'm gonna walk away from this career. What is the first thing happened that kind of lets you know this is the path that you need to be on?
So like I said, I had those 3 months. So I really just doubled down on building my business. My husband didn't have a job. Like, my husband had insurance, but my kids had insurance. I didn't have insurance. I had insurance through like the Air Force, but once we got off, I quit my job. I didn't. So I was like, I have to make enough money to support us. So that's what I did. I focused on getting new clients and building that up. And once I knew that I had enough clients and steady revenue coming in, that I at least could pay the bills and get groceries and meet our bare minimum, then I was like, okay, I can quit my job.
Mm.
And I'm pretty sure my parents have always supported me. Even during that entire time, like, my husband was still supporting me. He has never once said anything negative about me building my business. Like, he's always been there. And like, my family and my parents, they never said anything bad. I'm pretty sure they were thinking like, she's crazy. Like, he just transitioned out. He doesn't have a job. What are they going to do? I'm sure they thought that I was going to end up in their house again. But they've always been there. They've always supported me. Anytime I think that I couldn't do it, they've been there. But the big one was once I knew that I could pay our minimum bills, then I was like, okay, this is what we're doing.
And so let me ask you this. What is your business? What do you do?
So I help online business owners. So I come in and I do all the back end like tech systems. So when you're thinking like automations and your website and like building all this out and helping them run their business on the tech side of things, that's what I do.
Oh, wow. So when you went home and then when you told your husband, okay, I'm going to quit this job and then I'm going to start my own business, what did he say to you?
We talked about it for a long time. I already had a couple clients at that time. So I was bringing in money already. I was already on the scene. I think if I'd been starting from scratch, like there's no way I'd been able to do it. But we talked about it a lot. And it wasn't like an instant thing. It was, I don't want to go back to work. And like our youngest, he was born with some complications. So he basically spent the first 4 months of his life just screaming bloody murder. And that was a big part of it too, is I didn't feel like I could send him, even though he would have been fine. Like we loved our daycare. Our babysitter was absolutely amazing. Like she was there for this entire process. I could trust her with my kids. It was just when my baby was going through all this, that was another reason. I didn't feel like I could just leave him for 8 hours a day with somebody else. So there was like multiple reasons to encourage both of us for me to stay home. And we talked about it a lot. And finally he was like, yeah, if you can replace our income, as long as bills are getting paid, then he was like, I don't care what you do.
Oh, wow. And so that's absolutely amazing. I was telling her before we started to record that for her husband to have faith in her and not give her a hard time about stepping away from her career and stepping out on faith, that it says a lot about his character. Like he really believed in her. So in the beginning of this, you said that there have been so many things that God has done and that it's God because the way it happened. So can you tell the ladies a little bit about some of the things happened to where you're like, okay, this is God, because they need to be inspired?
Yeah, I think it's just every single step that's happened with life and my business. It's like almost every time that I get overwhelmed and I'm like, I don't know how to keep doing this, like things just, there seems to be so many obstacles. I'm a control freak. That is who I am as a person. I like to have a plan for everything. But when I give control over to God and basically I'm like, I don't know what to do. I trust you. I know you have a plan. You're going to make this work. He provides. And it was, let me think. So my husband transitioned out in 2022. And the beginning, like spring of 23, so many things had happened just back to back from like January to April that my husband did not grow up like faith or going to church or like anything like that. And he's always fully supported me. He goes every Wednesday and Sunday morning. Like, this is what I want to raise my kids. So he's always been very supportive, but it's not his thing. But so many things happened back to back that he turned and looked at me, and I will remember this moment forever. He was like, if I was a godly person, there's no explanation for these things that are happening other than God working. These aren't even coincidences at this point. There's no other way to explain it. So yeah, I don't, it's just,
And he doesn't have the same relationship that you have with God, but he is a witness to what God can do. He is a witness, like he can literally testify to the goodness of God, but he does not have the same type of relationship. And that's powerful because that just shows you the kind of God we serve. It's, even though he may not have the relationship, it's, yes, but I will still allow you to witness the way it is whenever you are faithful. And then when you listen to God, and then when you believe in the God, in the things God is showing you, I'm gonna allow you to witness this. And so you guys can have those conversations, and then you actually have a testimony, and he has a testimony, even though you're not in the same place. And that may transition him later on because he's witnessing how faithful God is. It may get him to a point to where his connection and in his relationship with God is just as strong as yours because you can't deny it. So let's talk about this. If you had any advice for a woman, right? She's watching this video and then she's saying to herself, oh my God, this sounds like what I'm going through. Oh my God, this sounds like me. I want to step out on faith. I want to start my own situations. and she may have her spouse, or it could be a child. It could be someone in her family that has some mental illness. It doesn't necessarily have to be military, but it could be that you are dealing with someone who has some issues going on. What are a few things you would tell them? I guess we can start with just getting through the season of life to where you had struggles with your husband. We can start there. And then once you stepped out on faith, some of the advice you would give them. So there's two parts to it.
Yeah, the first thing I think would be lean on your support system, whether that is your family, your friends, your coworkers. We all go through horrible situations in life, and we all go through hard times. And I have since found a very strong community around me and support system, but I didn't use it during that time. And I think that's one of my biggest regrets. None of us want to talk about it when we're going through hard times and life feels like it's horrible and nothing's going right. But I don't think you'll make it through it if you don't, one, lean on your support system, but also lean on God. If you believe in God and you have the faith, talk to him. He's going to provide 100%. But also just have faith and confidence in you. This is not what I imagined my life would be 10 years ago when I was a senior in high school. It's gone a completely different route. And I love it. Every single thing that's happened, even the hard times. This is why I was going through that period of life. I didn't want to be going through that. And it's taken me a couple of years to get to the point where I talk about this. But I appreciate that time now. And I talk about that time now because I felt so alone. And I know there are so many other people out there that feel so alone. And if my story and me going through that period can help one other person just not feel like they're alone and that like they're crazy, because you almost feel like you are crazy and you're going insane during these periods, then I help somebody else. And that's so many good things came out of that bad period. So yeah, don't be afraid to talk about it. Get support, whether it's your family, your friends, a therapist, preacher, whoever it is. Just reach out to people.
Okay. Can you tell the ladies your social platform so that they can find you, they can contact, and then they can support?
Yeah, the best place is Instagram. My handle is just Mantle & Co, MantleAndco. Or if you just search like Luvyna Mantle, I'm pretty sure I'm the only one in the world. So that's the best way to get a hold of me. I'm always on there and I'm always in the DMs. So if you're going through something similar or you have questions or you're wanting to ask where you can find extra support, I know people now, so I can connect you with people.
Awesome.
Or I at least know where to find answers.
Thank you so much. So, ladies, this is really important. This is one of the reasons why I started this podcast. And I'm going to say this on every podcast. We empower women one podcast at a time. Now, she has got on here. She has told her story. She has been vulnerable. She has been honest about the things that she has been through. There's no reason to be ashamed. There's no reason to feel like you're going to be judged, because it's important that you understand that you are not alone. There are women around you. There are women that you could possibly have access to, but you don't know unless you have these conversations. You are not by yourself. The same way that God brought her through this, she went through a lot. She has so many testimonies in her. We don't even really have time. Like, I had to just chop it up because we could go on for hours because how much she has been through. But if you look at her, like, she's still standing, she still has her business, she has her marriage, she has her children. Like, she's on here telling you her story. Like, she is a survivor of so many things. And if God brought her through this, he can bring you through it. You just have to trust God, right? She walked away from her career. She started her own company. She had all these things going on at home. She's a mother. She's a wife, right? She's a daughter. She's a friend. And so there are so many things that she has had to go through. And then a lot of it, she did it by herself because she didn't want to have those conversations, because she didn't want people to feel like her husband was not a hero. And he is still a hero. He will never stop being a hero. They are all heroes, and they have put their life on the line. Okay. They have put their life on the line and left their families to be able to go somewhere else just to be a protection to someone else. And that is powerful. So you have to keep those things in mind. I want to thank you for coming on the show. Again, this is Kweenduhm Conversations podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hello, beautiful people. I'm Luvyna Virgil, your host at Kweenduhm Conversations Podcast, where we empower women one podcast at a time. At Kweenduhm, I'm not just a host. I am a creator of many things that reflect the narratives and testimonies of survivors just like you. Visit Kweenduhm.com and discover a collection infused with meaning, from candles and aroma melts to prayer books, journals, apparel, and canvas art. Each piece carries a story, a survivor's journey, and a testament to resilience. And a special thanks to our sponsor, The Rose Co. at roseco.store. Experience the best hair where beauty meets luxury. Visit roseco.store today and support a small women-owned business. Your support truly matters, as it empowers young women and contributes to their success. I love to see young women stepping out on faith and making their mark on the world.